Working. There you go. Hello. Hey everyone, and welcome to another podcast episode of Team Steam Queens. I'm your girl Charlie, obviously. I'm joined by my other Steam Queens, Megan, Kay, Kim, Esme, and we also have a guest today in the wonderful Lily Rooke, who is an author. I'm going to, because there's so much of us, I'm going to try and not be the over talker today. So everybody do feel free to just jump in and say, whatever. But yes, so as you may have known on our socials, it was, or is, it still is, Pride Month. And for Pride Month, we asked you guys for recommendations of books we should read. And the recommendation we got, first of all, was Law and Lust. Yeah. We're going to discuss Law and Lust a little later. But first of all, we're going to have a introduction and a discussion with Lily. So I'll pass the mic, as it were, to you, and let everybody know about yourself, who you are, what you write, etc. And we'll just go from there.
Well, hey everybody! I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast to be a guest. I wanted to say, just before we get started, I wanted to just kind of like quickly pay tribute to the victims of the Oslo shooting that happened on Friday, which was right before their Pride Parade, which sadly had to be cancelled. And I just wanted to mention that because obviously it's still Pride Month and we're doing the Pride read. So my name is Lily Rooke, and I write queer dark fantasy. The book that I have out currently is called The Dying Light, and in 5 weeks today, the sequel, We Become Shadows, will be published. And We Become Shadows kind of goes more in the direction of romance. This series is kind of like a slow burn romance, and We Become Shadows really picks that up more. I think in general, as we are talking today, we're going to use LGBTQ plus or LGBTQ IAP plus interchangeably with queer, because obviously there's quite a lot of us and we've got quite a lot to talk about, and sometimes it's quicker just to say queer books or queer romance than it is to say the big long acronym. So if you hear us using those terms interchangeably, that's the reason why.
Cool stuff. Thank you so much for that. Just to clarify, has everybody here read The Dying Light? Have we all read it? I have. Cool. Okay, we've all read The Dying Light, so we all know where we're at. There's no like spoilers or anything like that, which is really, really good. So I think first of all, we do just want to say that, speaking for everybody, we really did enjoy it. For just being a good book, just generally speaking, in terms of good writing and things like that. But for bringing quite a sensitive and deep subject matter to the forefront. I know that it touched me in very emotional places reading it the first time. But what was a wonderful thing about The Dying Light, outside of the kind of darker elements, was the relationship between Charlie and Vasco, which was very sweet and organic and natural, and just beautiful in terms of Charlie being able to find some semblance of happiness and romance and love, etc., in such a kind of a dark space, which was really good. And I wanted to just ask, first of all, was that, I guess not intentional is the word, but is that part of the makeup of your story, or was it kind of just a consequence of that? Like, what is Charlie and Vasco's kind of origin story, if that makes sense?
I think it was really important to me that Charlie would have somebody like Vasco, and I wanted to make sure that no matter what was happening in the story, he would always have this kind of rock person, this kind of like counterpoint or counterbalance, and somebody who essentially somebody he needed, like from a kind of like writer perspective, like the person that this character needs is the person that I will give him and the person that I will write for him. And that is certainly, for their romance, that is central to my writing the whole way through the series. And thank you so much for your words, Charlie. That's really kind of you.
No, I like that. I mean, you featured on Books and Shit when I first read it, so we had a really good chat there. Cross promotion, guys, go and listen to that. But no, it was a really good episode featuring Lily, so definitely check that out. I had another question, but if someone else was going to say something, go ahead because I've forgotten what it was. Hold on. Sorry, no, Charlie and Basco's obviously relationship, and saying you wanted him to be that kind of solid kind of rock for him, which is amazing. Basco for Charlie, I mean. What I like about that is, and as I said, want to be respectful to everybody, so just hear what I'm saying. One good thing about their romance was that it was written in a way that wasn't any different because it was male male, and I was able to be invested and appreciate and love their love just for it being love, if that makes sense. Because we do come across some writing that whether it's queer or racial or socioeconomical, some people say, oh, I couldn't relate because I'm not like that. I couldn't relate because I'm not from there. I could, etc., etc. And what I really did like about them was that I was able to relate to that love because it was about finding that pillar and somebody that you can trust and someone that you can rely on. And that is love, regardless of who it's between, kind of thing. And I really did appreciate that as a love thing. And I think as well, sorry, as like a comparison, having read Lauren Lust, well, I didn't finish it, but having read Lauren Lust, I think that was the bit that was missing for me with Haruka and Nino, in the sense of like, I wasn't connecting with them because I don't know, they weren't as sweet together, maybe. I don't know. For the guys that did finish it, yeah, go on, Esme, because I'm overtook it. Go on.
I completely disagree with you there. I
You
think
disagree? Okay, go on.
yeah. So I think Lauren Lust is one of the sweetest romances I've ever read.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe, and I'm trying to figure out why we have such different opinions about how sweet it is. And maybe it is just personal preference, like the writing and the way it was presented in terms of the writing style. And I think you weren't a fan of Haruka's character in general, just like the way he spoke and way he presented himself and stuff like that. So that might have been a massive part of it. But no, I thought it was really, really sweet. I love them together. They're just like, I just want to take them both for coffee and then explore libraries together. Like, they're amazing.
No,
I think
get
that we
that.
have a broad range, right? Like we have
Yes.
the hate group over there that like loathed it, DNF.
I did.
And then who loved it, Lily. I think that you loved it as well. It was,
yeah. I think you
and
guys
then
are
I'm
on
like
side of the
flat
street.
in the middle.
Yeah.
And from listening to the conversation, because obviously we talk about it before we have our chat, but we try not to over talk because we want to talk about it here. Is my it was very, to compare it to The Dying Light, which was phenomenal. You know my feelings on that, Lily. But to compare it to The Dying Light, and here's where I could kind of see the difference. Like if you, sometimes when I'm not doing well emotionally, I'll lean on heavy like romance, like fluff romance, where really the romance is the central topic. And if you took the romance away, the story would fall apart. And I feel like Lauren Lust is that, but to the extreme, more than most of the like fluff contemporary romance that like. If you took Haruka and Nino out of that story, there is nothing. Like there is zero story whatsoever. There's some kind of vague world building that's kind of cool, but wasn't gone into that much, and no actual like inciting event, rising action, like very minimal any of that, and the story would just fall apart. So if you didn't buy into their characters, like
then you didn't buy into anything
for you. Whereas Lily with The Dying Light, if you, as much as I love Varley, if you took them out of it, there's still an amazing story.
Yes, there's still stuff going on. You've got the witch, the not pandemic, why is that the word I want? But you know what you mean, you've got the fight, you've got the battle, you've got the kids being stolen. There's other things for it. So yeah, Kaya was able to explain that way better than I had. If you're not invested in the two love interests and the love interests aren't there and there's nothing else for it, then you can't, be invested. And I think they have an element of the grump sunshine trope, which is great. I do love a grump sunshine. Even Charlie and Vasco are a bit grump sunshine, a bit. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, Varley kind of stop being so stop being so intense, dude. Like, we can do this, we can do
They
that.
certainly get more grumpy sunshine.
Yeah, exactly. And I was able to not necessarily relate, but I was just able to just appreciate that. Whereas I found with Haruka and Nino, I liked Nino. I liked his, like, when he tried to make jokes while they were researching and then kind of getting bitten back because Haruka didn't necessarily accept the joke straight away. I got his dynamic. It was Haruka I didn't take to. He was just a bit too stern for me. And I was just like, it took too long to get more personality out of him. Why I didn't really, if that makes sense. So yeah, it was, if there's nothing else going on, then I have to love these two people. And if I don't love them, then why am I here? It was just,
I like Haruka. That's why I was middle ground, because I could do their relationship. My issues were with the story at large. And also I want to say, he reminded me of like the Batman butler, Aseo.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
So, like, I wanted to love him, but the whole story long, it irked me that at the beginning, he was described as an older man. And then he spoke like a teenager for the whole book. And it drove me insane. So every time he talked, I was annoyed.
No,
So this is why romance is so polarizing though, and so hard to write, because you have to fall in love. So when you get real emotion out of your readers when you're writing it, you want your readers not just to kind of believe the romance and believe the people coming together. You want your readers to fall in love with the characters as well, so that they can then feel that emotion as the characters feel it. And we all love different things, different people, different scenarios. Some people love a grumpy, some people love a sunshine, some people love enemies to lovers, some people love friends to lovers. And so I think that's why it makes it so polarizing, and so why one amazing book can have one person loving it and one person hating it, because it evokes such like strong emotions from us.
Emotion. Yeah, I mean, can I put my hand up and say I didn't hate it? I didn't hate it. I just didn't get it, I think. And then because there are some books I hate, like I outright hate them. I will bash them till the day I die. I'm sorry. But this one, it was a bit like with the Wild and Wicked Things that some of us are reading at the moment. You can see the potential. It's just this out of reach. It's like I could see where I wanted it to go or what would have worked better for me. And I wasn't quite getting it, and I wasn't getting it quick enough. But as I said, I still appreciate that, say, Esme and Lily got there, you know, sooner, I guess. So it's the wonder of books, isn't it? Like, you know, you can love and hate something at the same time. But I didn't hate it. I just didn't take to it.
Yeah, and can I just say that I kind of wish that a dab of the, like, romance central was tossed into Wild and Wicked Things that we're currently reading.
Okay, yeah.
Like if we could take like a little bit of that aspect of Lauren Less and just toss it into Wild and Wicked Things, I think that book could have benefited from a little extra of the
yeah, a bit more romance. And to be fair, we're not really going off topic that much, because Wild and Wicked Things has a queer element. So there's 3 witches in this one, 3 female witches, and it's there's kind of a broken love triangle thing going on. One loves someone, one doesn't love the other one. There's a lot going on, so we can actually have kind of a mind meld for that. So if anybody wants to check that out, Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. Sorry, the book's over there. By Francesca May. You guys should check that out, which is really, really, really good. As I said, I didn't finish it, so everybody else did. Kimmy, have you got anything to say about the rest of it? Because you let me know about the ending and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love it when a book has a plot, even a romance.
That was so shady.
But even if the plot is in the romance itself, that's also fine. But I just found it lacking here. There was nothing holding them like back, or there was no struggle for them. It was so easy. Like, great, it's like it can be like that in real life, so that's good. But yeah, for me it was just too easy. I wish they had in some way complemented each other more. So they have very opposite personalities, and I like them both, but to me I don't know, it just worked, and there was no no, how do you say that? Like a trial or something. It was just too
there
No
easy.
was
conflict.
nothing.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
conflict. So and the tension wasn't enough for me either. And then it's slow burn, which I love, but without the tension. So
It
that's
was
the
just
thing I love
burning.
about slow burn. There needs to be this yearning.
It was just
So
burning, no
yeah.
yearning.
Yeah, I don't know that they necessarily had yearning so much as like confusion.
Yeah.
Like,
You know what I was confused about? The positioning during the more intimate scenes. At some point,
Okay.
I was like, oh, because I have no experience with male, and then I
Yeah.
was like,
Okay.
how are they now? And I had this image in my head, and then something happened, and then I had to reposition the image in my head again. Like, oh, that's possible. Oh, I didn't know. Learned something about
You know
that.
what though? We've had this talk, and I can't remember which one it was. It might have been months to May, so it might have been last podcast. But just in the sense of when writing, more kind of acrobatic sessions, during lovemaking, it has to make sense because I have read some, sex, smut, steam scenes, whichever you want to call it, and I'm just thinking, who bends like that? Like that's not a thing. Like even if you're the most flexible pretzel in the world, it's like they were so caught up in the fantasy element of it, in the kind of possibly shock factor or just the excitement of les eggs, that they didn't actually think whether this was aerodynamically possible. Okay.
And
And
it's
it's
also
like,
Oh,
no,
sorry, I was
go.
going to say it's like a plot hole that they haven't found basically. Because one minute they're on top, but then the next minute they're on the bottom, and
Yeah.
this is all sex, like all
Yeah.
sex that I see written. The amount of time you're like, no, you weren't there. Like how have you gone from being there to there? Like at what point did that happen?
It just
I actually thought
completely
that Lauren
seems
Lustow
small.
handled the sexual aspect super well. Now, I will be the first to say that I've had more experience with sapphic romance.
Okay.
So I haven't read a lot of male romance. And when I have, it was kind of like in like a reverse harem environment.
Mhm.
And what I really loved about Lauren Lust was that it was, and The Dying Light, was that they're both, male romance focused without the aspect of also having a female present and turning it into like a different kind of book.
Yeah.
And I thought it was handled well. Like I was able to get, like there was a moment, and I will say, Kim, I'm with you, where I was reading and I was like, whoa, I don't have these parts. Hold on, mental picture. Where are we going? How are we?
These parts.
Just because like
Yeah.
personal experience not included.
Yeah.
And then I would like zipped right past that. I thought that the sex scenes were really well done in this book. So that's why I actually thought that the back half of Lauren Lust was stronger than the beginning.
The second half.
Yeah.
See, and that's the thing. That's the struggling, isn't it? Because all of us are writers. Oh, where's Kimmy gone? All of us are writers, so we know how difficult it can be to say all the things you want to say without it being an info dump, and without it being a bit of a just a slog to get through. Because if the second part is great but nobody gets there, then you're only ever going to be judged on the first half, i.e. what happened with me, kind of thing, in terms of this book. So it's really it's unfair if that makes sense, but you can definitely learn from it, kind of thing. What was I going to say? So with, obviously I didn't get to the sex scene, but I know there was meant to be like, it's like a mating orgy thing that I was told wasn't actually seen, like as in their mating.
Yeah, it was never about like that being on the page, I don't think.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
they kind of afterwards were like, oh yeah, that was like you know what's coming up, and then next thing you know they're talking about it and it's past. So I don't think, if I'm remembering correctly, as my Lily.
Okay.
Because
what? Yeah.
Sorry. I think that was in terms of the storyline, that was a cultural aspect of vampires themselves, because it was so difficult to form a mated bond and it took several tries. From a legality point of view, there had to be witnesses if the bonding would form in that respect. So it wasn't necessarily an orgy with everybody else watching, but I'm sorry, with everybody else engaging. Yeah, it was more a married couple having sex, and then they needed witnesses as to whether they would bond or not.
Yeah, they definitely talked about it afterwards, because
it's like part of his research.
Yeah, and the creepy dude during
Gael
staring at Haruka the whole time.
Yeah.
Ooh,
That was the thing. That was
that's also from kind of historical scenes as well, though, isn't it? Like back in the day,
bedding.
to make the bedding, to make sure that, you know, the marriage was consummated in more kind of aristocratic, and king and queens, they would watch to ensure that
The
it actually
consummation
took
Yeah.
place. Yeah, exactly. So
No.
otherwise they could stop the marriage. So I
Makes
find that
sense.
interesting as well, the way that the authors probably used that in their world building, but changed it around a bit.
Definitely, that's the best word, because, you know, we've touched a bit on the stuff that didn't work, particularly for me and maybe Kim. But one thing that did work that I mentioned in my review was the world. I wouldn't necessarily say world building, but the lore, the research, the background, just the
idea of the world
intricacy.
building.
Yes, the idea of it. Exactly. Like, there is such a rich world underneath the surface that she didn't quite, you know, kind of take away, because I respected that there was these clauses and there was a whole book about it, and I'd been researching for hundreds of years. It was wonderful. I just didn't get that, what I needed out of that to make it as rich as it could be, if that makes sense. But I think that is a universal thing. Sorry, I'm swatting a fly. That is a universal thing that everybody kind of did enjoy from it. It was clever, it was well researched, it was, her world was understood. Do you know what I mean? Unlike Wild and Wicked Things, that apparently has no clue what their magic system is. I'm sorry. What is this? What is this? But what I did want to touch on, sorry, when I was mentioned the orgy first, was people like dark fantasy. People like dark romance. You know, there are some things that, you know, whether a content or trigger warnings, some people, you know, aren't necessarily, you know, able to kind of absorb, and other people are more okay with it, kind of thing. Having written a dark fantasy queer book, Lily, where do you find the not where do you find, how do you make sure you're writing scenes, content that are relatable, real, but still respectful to what people have gone through? Because before I let you answer, there are books, I'll say, like, is it Guild is the first one, who do use certain triggering things, i.e. rape, sexual abuse, Stockholm syndrome, as just very clickbaity things, which I find rather disgusting. So how are you, or how did you go about writing that without being that guy, and just, you know, just writing it for the sake of it being to the reader, kind of thing?
So this is where I could take over the entire show. So cut
Go
me
do
off
it.
if I'm
Do
speaking
it.
for too long.
Okay, go on.
So-
Do it.
Okay, so first of all, I agree with you very much about there are certain representations that I find impossible to read, and that motivated me to want to write something different and to write it in a different way. I was actually talking to Ez about this earlier today. There's certain dialogue that, although authors can't know what will be re-traumatizing to everybody, I find that I have to be very wary of romance in general, because a lot of the dialogue that happens in sex scenes is extremely triggering. Like, it plays on a lot of past trauma. So for me, what I try and do is I try and be extremely character driven. That's one of the things actually I enjoy about the Lore and Lust sex scenes in particular, is that I feel like they are very character driven and they're character led as well. So when I'm writing intimate scenes, like to give you some context, like I would say I checked it on the Steam Queen's chili rating. And I think my Steam level at the moment is about a 4, possibly going up to a 5 in the next book.
Nice.
So to do that in a real, relatable, respectful way, I have to deep dive psychologically into the character whose perspective I'm writing from, and be completely truthful to his experience. And what he is thinking of and what he is aware of and what he is conscious of. And of course, like, that scene isn't going to happen in chapter 1. So it's also like what has happened from the whole story, from page 1 up until when these scenes happen, that informs these scenes. What has the other character learned about his intimate partner? What can he now ask for or talk about or tolerate? What does he want? What does the other one want? How are they going to communicate that consensually? And of course, that's only like definitely these scenes. I swear, I spent days editing these scenes on the final draft, like hours and hours and hours going over the same paragraph, just being like, make it exactly right to get the exact right feeling. Because what I don't want is, I don't want somebody like, sorry, to give you a bit of context, like, I absolutely adored The Sins of the Orc by, is it Finley Fenn? I forget the surname.
Yes.
But
she's done.
I read that like yesterday, like, absolutely incredible. My absolute favorite romance ever. Like, I don't know what could top The Sins of the Orc. However, the sex scenes threw me out of my love for it, because I felt like while the rest of the book was so emotion-led, so character-led, so deeply informed by Kest and his past and everything that made him who he was, and was so respectful and so truthful, it comes to not the very first scene. I don't know if you know the scene that I'm referring to. Not the.
I've not read it yet.
I don't know if we can use like all the words in the podcast. Like, we don't need to.
All the words.
All the words.
All the words. So the anal fingering scene, absolute perfection. However,
not a sentence I ever thought I'd hear.
The scenes that followed, I just they just went back to not having that. They weren't character led, and they weren't character, and or less so. I don't want to slam it, because I absolutely adore the book. But if there was one thing that I could have asked for, it would have been, stay in your main character's heart. Does that make sense? Like, stay in his pain. Don't shy away from the pain and vulnerability around sex, because someone like Kest, someone like Charlie, they're not going to suddenly be okay.
Yes.
It's impossible.
So I haven't read that book.
I read books like that, I get angry.
I was going to say, I haven't read that book. What made that scene perfection versus the other scenes? I think that's always really interesting. What like made it work?
Okay, so what made that scene work was the push and pull between Kest and Eft, of like what Eft might give, what Kest might get from Eft, like the hints of like, okay, so the contrast between how Kest has been treated, I forget his name, but by like the awful orc, how he's been treated by him compared to how Eft is trying to treat him, because it's the smallest thing, like the smallest it's so, I mean, it's high steam but low explicit, if that makes sense. And like, it's the contrast between how he's been treated to how he might be treated in the future that's just, it absolutely stole my heart, that scene. I was like, how can it be so good, so intense, so intimate, and it was so true to the characters and so vulnerable, but so and like so raw, but so it just felt so right for both of them, and it was quite early on as well. I was really impressed, really impressed.
I mean,
reading that.
I've not read Sins of the Orc. I think I'm still on like Librarian, which is like book 2 or book 3 or something. But I can respect, even without having read the scene, that for, you know, main characters being orcs, obviously, who are quite big and aggressive, you know, depending on what your clan you're from and stuff like that. She has done really well in maintaining a sense of, you know, sweetness and intimacy between, you know, quite feral, aggressive looking characters, which is a fate in and of itself. She's done really well in that sense, because even just their whole connection of having male relationships, having those relationships. The way they discussed it in the first very book was just like, why would we not seek pleasure together? Like, what, they're just very blasé about it, which was wonderful. And I think what you were kind of touching on, or bearing to, what I got anyway, was that using Charlie as an example, who's obviously been through a very traumatic experience, one of the biggest things, whether it's a hetero or homosexual relationship, whatever, that you can give a partner is their choice and their understanding. So for Charlie, who's come from a situation where he didn't have a choice who was going to use him, basically, like, I can get that any scene where the possible aggressor, or at least the dominant character, is allowing the less dominant character to feel safe, to feel protected, to feel understood and heard, and be given that choice of what and when and how they want to do things. That's where the beauty comes from, because it's just like, as you said, to be in the pain, but still respect that I'm giving you, I shouldn't say this power, but I'm giving you this power because I have been through all of this, but I want to give myself to you in this way. And that is a massive thing in and of itself, because that choice wasn't there before. My body, my mind was taken at one point. So the fact that I'm now sharing this with you is the intimacy, and it is the love. And to be able to write that, whether it's girl and girl, boy and girl, man and man, trans, orcs, fairies, minotaurs, anything, to be able to tick those boxes, I think is a really wonderful thing. So that's what I got from what you were saying. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I
think this is what. Oh, sorry. You go, Kate. I'll say after.
No, I was gonna say, I think that's the kind of the takeoff of like the romance resurgence in a bunch of different forms, which, I would say way overdue for obviously all of our queer romance, but then also the emergence of, like, we just had a whole month about monster romance, because people are just starting to write really good romance, like between people, between creatures, between whoever. I think the focus has been less on like, ooh, let's write a thrilling sex scene, to let's write really internalized romance, no matter who it's between. And I think that that's working across the board on all fronts. And the best part about that being just because the really good writing has come forward and come out. And I think that's, again, through indie resurgence into the market of not just traditional publishing, a lot more indie, and a lot more indie coming forward as absolutely amazing writing, that people are getting introduced to queer romance and also monster romance, and also, just like huge things that haven't been in the forefront in traditional and are so dang good, like so good.
It's almost like we don't have that censorship of the traditional publishing houses, which is allowing. And I was just going to, I was basically going to say what you were going to say, Keir. We've got a question here, how to write queer romance. But in general, like, at the basis of writing good romance, it doesn't matter if it's queer, monster, none of it matters. It's writing romance. It shouldn't. It's always relatable if it's good romance, basically. And it's always
I can direct you to the writer community blog to answer that question. A little bit of a plug. Because I wrote an article on that. So if you'd like to head over to the writer community blog, you can find an answer to your question.
Well, we'll definitely share that in the story.
We'll put the link in the description. Exactly. As Megan said, it is just writing romance that works, because using our girl Ezzy as an example, she's basically, it's not necessarily romance just yet, but the relationship with Alira and Mason, which is a relationship we're not even supposed to want, is like a whole other situation.
I wouldn't even class that as a romance, though, because
that's what I mean. It's not a romance, but we're sitting there rooting for this to happen with this terrible guy because of the connection. It's called the connection series, but because of the connection that they have, it's wrong on so many levels. But we want it so bad. So when you write good connections, when you write good relationships between people, readers' minds will take them wherever, because of how well it's written. And they're not your typical standard togetherness, you know, in that sense. So the fact that we're sitting, he's the bad guy, but we love him, is a whole other situation. So I think that's a kudos to you, Esme.
Thank you. You love him now. Just wait.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing, isn't it?
That's why it's so powerful. Because he's a bad guy, and he will be a bad guy, or continue to be a bad guy. But you've written that connection, and that's what it's all about. How to write good romance. You write a good connection between the characters, and then it kind of doesn't matter who the characters are. You're rooting for them. You want them to fall in love.
Exactly.
It's like it's not going to happen, guys.
No, it's not. It's not, and it's so unfair. I think that leads us on nicely, though. I've got another one.
Wait, I still have a question.
Oh, sorry, go on.
So yeah, I agree that it's more about the characters, and then it doesn't matter what gender they are or whatever. But Lily, do you think that maybe there are some nuances you have to think about when writing queer romance? Like some subtle things that are different in queer romance as opposed to straight romance?
As to straight ones,
I think that it's important. It's certainly important to do good research. This actually will come up in what I wrote down in my notes as queer notes.
I love it.
Definitely, like if anyone, this doesn't just apply to queer romance, but if anyone is writing outside of their own personal area of expertise or their own personal experience, I think it's really important to do a ton of research, because there'll be things that you don't know that you have assumptions about, even, for instance, like just talking about myself. There'll be things that you never thought to think about. So yes, I think that there definitely is a ton of nuance, because like, say you took any single letter from like the oh God, I forgot the word, like the little, you know what I mean, the LGBTQ+. The acronym, that's the word I'm looking. If you took any letter from that, there would be nuances across the board for sure. But I do think that like, and I think there's a question, right, between like including rep and writing from the perspective of a character. And I think like, again, it's like a kind of greater or lesser extent of preparation, thinking, research, depth, depending on how big a role you want that character to have. So yeah, you're certainly right about that. I think actually, like, sorry, I'm plugging again. I know that the article that I wrote goes into a lot of depth on this topic. So like, if anybody would like to learn more or have any questions answered, I definitely did a deep dive in that article for sure.
Check it out, my friends. Check it out.
It's hard. And this comes from writing in this world in general, when you're like, and I can only speak from my perspective as a cis straight white woman. I don't want my book to just look like me. I want my characters to be everyone. I want to have Black characters and Latin American characters and LGBTQIA rep, but at the same time, I don't want to put my shoes in their, or my feet in their shoes and claim that space. So Kim, I'm so glad you asked that, because I'm, it's a question all of us who are going to write are going to ask, is like, of course we want to represent the real world that we're living in. But we also don't want to speak on other people's experiences and that place in a publishing world that, I mean, when we're being realistic.
That's a really good point. A good rule of thumb, just my own opinion, a good rule of thumb, I think, is are you telling a story with somebody, or are you telling somebody else's story that's not yours to tell? Does that make sense? So for instance, like,
absolutely,
I don't think that it's my place to write a story about the experience of racism, for instance. It's not my place to talk about what it's like to experience racism. It's just not my place. However, I can and do write plenty of characters who are like BIPOC characters. But I would never write a story of what it's like to experience racist abuse. That's not my place. So
Yeah,
that's
I think
kind
that
of,
it's
for the
it's literally that is the distinction. That is the bread and butter, because obviously I've had a lot of people ask me the same about, you know, writing race, which I did actually write a blog about for the writing community, so check that out as well. No, I have actually had people ask me that, as well as do sensitivity reads and beta reads via a Fiverr gig, asking about that kind of element. And let's just be very clear about it. If we all just wrote exactly who we were, what we looked like, then, you know, our stories that were written would just be in little lanes and little pockets and all looking exactly the same. I can write a white woman, a Chinese woman. I can feature an Asian man. You know, I can feature a queer character. But as we've just said, the bottom line is you can feature whoever you want, but you can't write the stories of whoever you want. It's just as simple as that. It's not like people try to make it harder than it needs to be. You can have the sassy best friend black girl if you want. Cool. It's a bit of a trope and a bit of a stereotype. But if that's just a person you just want to feature and it's just there and you're not going to dive any more into her background and her story, that might be problematic because you have inserted a stereotypical character without any other research. We get that. But if you are then going to give her backstory and the reason why she's sassy and the reason why she's giving all this attitude, then that's research that you do have to do in order to make that credible, and not just this, as I said, creature that you've just made up because that's what you think the sassy black friend is about. It's not saying you can't have the sassy black friend. She just has to have a reason for being that way. She has to have a scope for why she has that part of her personality more expressive than the others. Because if we sit and say we're only allowed to write who we are, then we're just the problem, aren't we? Like, we can't only just write who we are. That doesn't make any sense. Then how is anybody else meant to get into the thing? It was silly. I had a whole guy, as I said, I did a beta read, an Asian gay guy asked me to sensitivity read about an African straight man. And before I even said yes, I said, well, first of all, I'm black, fine, but I'm not African, as in that cultural background I don't really understand. And I'm not a man. So, you know, those are two things that I was always going to be a bit like, well, this is just what I would think, but I'm not from that kind of thing. And then at the end of it, it was just a whole back and forth of, well, you can't say this and you can't say that. And I'm thinking, the black part I bloody can. But the other stuff, I already told you I couldn't. So why are you here? Like, it was just, he was just so ignorant. It was silly. It was so silly. But that's another conversation.
That's another. And I think,
go ahead,
sorry, I was just gonna just continuing on that, and then I'll be done. But I completely agree, and I think the fear of people worrying about, you know, being told that they can't write certain characters and stuff, and it becoming so over the top has led a lot of people to just keep their stories very small, and we don't want that. We want, especially, you know, whether it's fantasy, it's contemporary, whether it's historical, you want people to explore the world as it would have been and touch on those issues, as you say, without necessarily writing a book about taking someone else's story. But it's so important to include the entire world as it is. Otherwise, people feel either misrepresented or completely underrepresented. And that's just not doing your world and your book a justice either.
Yeah, definitely. What were you going to say, Kim?
I completely agree with that. You shouldn't write about somebody else's struggle. But then I thought of Heartstopper, Alice Oseman, because that's a woman who wrote it, right? But yet she writes about male relationships in a great way. But
do we know Alice's background or, you know, research towards writing those characters, though? So that would be the question, isn't it? It's not that you can't do it, it's just, has she done the appropriate work in order to get it done? Because I think that's the kicker. You can do it, you just have to do it respectfully, if you're
Mhm.
writing from a particular sense of emotion or feeling or struggle. Do you get what I mean? She can
Mhm.
write a gay character, but she can't respectfully or properly write a gay character's emotions about coming out or their first kiss with a boy, because she didn't go through those things. So
But
who
she
did she
does,
speak to?
right?
And that's what I'm saying. I don't know. So if
Oh
that,
yeah, it's about the
where's it
yeah,
coming
in
from? Where's it
Heartstopper,
coming from for
it's
her?
one of the
Yeah.
themes. Yeah.
Have you heard of that author though that wrote a book? It was something called I think I'm a Helicopter or something like that. It was about an author's own experience of being transgender and because
Oh, you're
she
cutting out a bit
chose to
again.
keep
Oh, there you go. There you go.
she wrote her experience, or they wrote their experience on being transgender, but because the author chose to keep their personal life very private and didn't want to basically come out and say, this is my experience. She was completely cancelled on Twitter. People went after her. People forced her to take her book down. I'll find the link. It was very interesting. And the person that wrote this was just like, this is my experience, but why should I have to justify myself to you? Why should I have to lay bare all of my trauma to justify that I am able to write this book? So it's a very, very hard topic to unpick, and it's a real grey area, because even if you do have the experiences necessary to write, why should you have to lay bare your entire experience and your entire back history so that people then say, oh, you're fine, yes, you can write this book as well,
to do it.
you're okay to write this book. So it's a really, really hard thing to kind of
What are you saying, Lily?
I was just gonna say like this whole basically like forced outing because of basically anonymous people on the internet being like, it is not your place. It happened with Alice Oseman years ago on Tumblr. It happened with Samantha Shannon years ago on Tumblr. And at the time, these were young girls, or in Alice Oseman's case, I think Alice Oseman identifies as non-binary. She definitely uses she, they pronouns. I'm not completely sure, but I know she, they use those pronouns. I know Samantha Shannon at the time, she was like in her early 20s, and she was just bombarded with anonymous hate on Tumblr about how like it isn't your place to be writing these books because you're straight. And she's just like, she said numerous times, I am not comfortable talking about this online. I'm not in a situation where I'm comfortable feeling safe to be out, and then she talked about it in full. She was just like, I feel I have been pressured to come out as X and Y. And I think she still talks occasionally about the experience of what that was like for her. I know Casey McQuiston recently, like just this month, has written as well a really interesting post on Instagram about the same experience for them. Like when they were writing, I think they said like they were conscious that it would most likely happen to them before they came out with their debut novel. So despite not feeling ready and not feeling in a safe place to come out, I think they're from like quite a religious American background. They were just like, I have to do it because I can't face what is going to come if I'm not out. So there is definitely a conversation to be, you can't look at people and be like, just because you don't have a rainbow in your bio, you don't have a right to write this story. Like that's, nobody owes anybody coming out because we don't know the situations that people are living with, basically. It would be lovely to be like, everybody can live openly as themselves. That would be incredible. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in, though.
No.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the world that we live in with this like social media generation, that's the hazard of any of this is that people just expect you to put your entire life and your entire viewpoint online. Whereas, even 10, 15 years back, most people that picked up a book had no idea who the author was.
Yes.
Unless
you've never seen
George R.R. Martin writing your Nada blog, like a lot of authors didn't have any presence online whatsoever. And that how known they were had no
semblance on what they
on whether or not that they had books or got published. And there's ups and downs of that, because now again we have beautiful indies coming forward that come out through social media, through which are found and great and amazing, but then also there's people who are forced to come forward with stories that they're not ready to tell yet.
They're not ready to tell.
We feel the need to know everything about creators.
Yeah.
To tell them that they're able to tell their story. If anyone does want to read that, it's on. There's a really good article about it on Vox called "How Twitter Can Ruin a Life," and the author was called Isabel Fall, and her pronouns are she. And she wrote a book called "I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter," and it was published in a science fiction magazine, and then they were forced to remove it after she refused to basically come out. But it's a very interesting story about an author who was kind of, victimized over her story and how she had to justify herself to be able to tell.
What's a big thing as well? It's like very slightly off topic, but just in the sense of, because cancel culture and social media culture is such a huge thing, it's like it's making people have to choose how kind of strong they want to be, if that makes sense, because different characters are going to react differently to how people virtually or physically kind of like attack them. Do you know what I mean? Like, how many times have we seen a celebrity do something or whatever and they're forced to apologize? And like, I've always sat and thought to myself, should they have had to? Like, how often, like, or if their transgression comes up every year, are they going to apologize every year because people are forcing them to do this? It's just like, it's making people be who they aren't or who they might not have wanted to be in order to kind of save themselves. And there's only kind of a few people who I would say are allowed to get away with certain things because of the money behind it. Like, for example, if Sarah J. Maas was to say something tremendously shocking, it's very unlikely she'd have to be accountable for it, in the sense of she might put out a shitty 10-word statement that doesn't really say much, but her publisher is still going to back her because she makes them money. Do you know what I mean? And that's not just kind of putting a target on Sarah's head. That's just using her as an example because she's so huge. Do you know what I mean? Whereas there are some smaller people who can say one itsy bitsy thing that probably wasn't even meant for that. And suddenly it's you're having to posture yourself and do all of this in order to be accepted. When genuinely speaking, you probably aren't sorry. You didn't mean it that badly or whatever it was. And it's just really unfair that people are being forced into, doing and being things that they might not have chosen for themselves, basically.
Look at J.K. Rowling.
I
was going to say, look at J.K. Rowling. She never even apologized, and she's still making loads of money at books.
She is, but this is the thing with J.K., and I think this is a big divide among people, because she's the master kind of her own universe. She has that power. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Even using Sarah as an example, yes, Sarah writes a million books and everybody loves them and stuff like that. But Sarah isn't Warner Brothers Harry Potter tour money.
Yeah.
She's not printed shops in King's Cross money. She's not, Primark using your image. She's not toys. She's not that level of boss to not have to say anything. J.K. Rowling doesn't have to listen to anybody.
No. Yeah,
and,
unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. She doesn't have to answer to anyone. So when it comes to a level of accountability, unfortunately, in this era of cancel culture or not, if you've got enough firepower underneath you, wherever it comes from, you can do what you want. And it's shocking that is allowed, basically.
Which below that bar, it's the exact opposite. Like, you'll get absolutely attacked for any perceived slight. I mean, and I think all of us also deal with it from like a creator standpoint of even just looking of like, what do you put on your stories? What do you leave out? Like, people look into your life in a way that's absolutely insane for so many of the creators that I know, and for the creator that I am, I would rather like put my heart into what I create. And then you have to step into a world of, well, now I have to put myself out there too. Otherwise, people question you. And that's so hard for a lot of creators that I know. Like, most of us are like, look, we write books for a reason. We don't necessarily want to be front and center. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just want to write. I will have to. Well, I will. We're going to start wrapping up now because we've got a few minutes to go before our hour is up, and everybody's on different times, and we don't want to keep people up too late or early or that kind of thing. So first of all, before we do our little rundown, I do want to thank Lily for joining us. You've provided us with some great kind of insights and sound bites and stuff. We're going to put some stuff on social media. So thank you very much for being a part of, an important discussion. I mean, it started off just talking about law and lust, but there's so much to unpack here. And I think we've had such a wonderful discussion and different perspectives and stuff while keeping it, all respectful and together. So thank you so much for joining us. Was there anything you wanted to share with, fans, listeners, that kind of thing about your upcoming projects and stuff?
Oh, me. So 5 weeks to the day until We Become Shadows is out. So you can pre-order. Look out for the paperbacks, which are hopefully coming out in the next couple of weeks or so.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
And thank you so much again for inviting me.
No problem. Guys, I think we'll figure it out once we come off this. But we'll ask for some recommendations for our July pick. I don't know what we're gonna do for July. What's happening in July? We'll think of something. What's going on? Yeah, something summery. I don't know. We'll think of something.
I think we were saying something like summer steam.
Yeah, summer steam, beach reads.
Yeah.
Easy,
Beach
fluffy.
Yeah. I think we're gonna go with that.
We're gonna step back from the heavy. And go
back from the heavy. No, good time. So thank you so much, everyone. Obviously, Esme, Kaya, Kim, Megan, me, Lily, everybody. Thank you for listening again. This will be obviously up on our social media platforms. And have good weekends, days to everybody. And we'll speak to you guys soon. Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.